morning. It is November 10th, 11 o'clock a.m. in the morning, Sunday morning, and it's about 40 degrees out. And I'm privileged to say that today's interview is with Sylvia Taylor. And if some of you don't know that name very well, you probably would go, oh, she was Lowell's postmaster for many years. And I ran into you at Fallisburg, and I heard you sing, which I never knew that voice was inside you. It was just beautiful roar. And I thought to myself, I've got to get a hold of you and talk to you about where you grew up and how did you get to Lowell. So let's start there. Okay. So what year were you born, and where were you born at?
I was born in 1953 I was born in Mount Pleasant, but I grew up on a farm in Clear, Michigan. The farm was established in 1883 by my great-grandfather. And my father was the last to farm it, where my mother just passed, so we're in the process of preparing the farm to be sold, which is hard. I grew up in Clare and then got married and went to Lansing. I started working in the Postal Service in Lansing in 1976.
Wow.
And I worked there for 3 years, and then I transferred to Long Island, New York, and worked in Hicksville, New York. It really was Hicksville.
So it truly was named Hicksville?
It truly is Hicksville.
Now, is that north of New York? Is that a north?
It's out on Long Island.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
it's out on Long Island. And so then I went to Kansas City, Missouri. So you might say, why are you moving all around the countryside?
Yes.
And that's because when I was in New York, he wasn't my husband yet, but we married in Kansas City. So I followed my husband through his career with the National Weather Service. And because I worked for the Postal Service and there was a post office everywhere, I could transfer my job and keep working for the Postal Service.
That is great. Now, first of all, though, when you first said I work for the post office, now were you a letter carrier? Were you out there doing that, or were you in the office making sure that my big fangled letters were getting to the right spot?
Right. I started out in Lansing working on what they called the letter sorting machines, which was like a miniature computer that we would key like on a typewriter or keyboard. We would key where the mail went based on the zip code.
I see.
And then the machine sorted it. And then I went into management, and so of my almost 34 years with the Postal Service, I was probably a manager for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, did you go behind the scenes? Did you go to college in these different states? Or was it set up to where, as you put time in, that was how you were able to walk into your manager's job?
Well, most of my manager jobs, I didn't have to have a college education. I did over the years, yet I never did quite finish my bachelor's. I'm probably about 3 credits away from finishing it, but I had the job, so it was like, why?
Absolutely. So I never knew how the post office worked, how that was. I didn't know if it was more like a military structure, because the wording for the post office is very military structured.
Very.
So and your husband worked for
He worked for the National Weather Service, and he worked in the regional offices in New York and the regional office in Kansas City. And then when my husband was older than I was, he was almost 20 years older, so when he was eligible to retire, then it was like, okay, now you can follow me.
Wow. Yes. Yes.
And so Lowell was actually the first postmaster job that I applied for, because it was back in Michigan. My family was in Michigan, and he had a daughter in Michigan.
Oh, right.
And so it was, a place where we could come, and we were sailors, which may sound strange, but we were sailors. And so he was like, as long as it's near the big water, I'm willing to go. And so I said, well, how about Lake Michigan?
There you go. Is that big enough?
So I applied for the Lowell position and got it. And this was my first postmaster position, which I had been, station managers, different positions in Missouri, but I'd never had a postmaster position before.
Because you had those other jobs in the post office, you had the qualifications to walk in as a postmaster because you had done those jobs too.
Right.
Wow, that's fabulous.
Yeah, in a big city, they would have one postmaster in a big, like Grand Rapids has a postmaster, but then they have several satellite offices they call stations, and each one of those stations are big enough to have a station manager.
Okay.
So that,
So that's how they figured that out. So Lowell was big enough to have a postmaster.
To have a postmaster.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is definite.
Yeah.
Now, what year was that you came?
So Charlie Doyle retired in, I think it was, like February or March that Charlie retired. Maybe it was June of 1990. And so I got the job and came to Lowell in October of 1990.
Wow. Now, I have to say that now in 1990, that was only 10 years after I graduated from high school. So I was busy running around trying to make a house payment by then and raise kids. But when you had gotten that job here in Lowell, that was the talk of the town. Could you give us a little insight of what you were walking into?
Okay, well, let's go back to Charlie. Charlie had been there a long time, and previously, postmasters were a political appointment. Prior to 1971, to be a postmaster, you had to politically be appointed by your party. So whoever was in power in the politics, you became, they appointed a postmaster. So Charlie was one of the last political appointees.
Okay, I think he was Democrat, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Yes, that was always the interesting part of Charlie in town, because it's such a Republican town. And Charlie was very vocal about being Democratic. Yeah, so when I came in, I was the first female postmaster. First of all, I was the first postmaster in a long, long time.
Yes.
The first change of postmaster. I was a female, so I'm quite certain that was a different culture.
Yes.
And my husband was African American. So those were all things that I'm quite sure made me the talk of the town. Because when the Lowell Ledger took the picture, I was sitting at the desk and my husband was standing to one side and my daughter was standing to the other side. And there was no question that was my family.
That's right. That's right. You came. That's one thing that I, like I said, it was the talk of the town. What my takeaway was that as a young woman, and this is a very Republican town, that there wasn't a lot of women in power around here. So when I heard of you, and then I would drop off packages and get to peek around to get to see who you were, and it wasn't hard to find who you were because everybody else that was in that post office lived here in Lowell. So I could find you right away.
You could find a stranger.
That's right. And I remember talking to my father and my mother about it, and they were both very intrigued and very happy. Like my father said, change is always going to happen, so you have to embrace it. But my father was very he was in awe, just like I was, of your position and that all the credentials that you brought to the table to fill those shoes. You know, Charlie Doyle, that's a hard act to follow. That certainly was. You're the first postmaster, female.
Right.
And here you show up at the Rotary Club. What happened?
Well, Charlie again was a big part of getting me to join Rotary. Okay. And women had not been in Rotary that long. I think women had only been in the Lowell Rotary Club maybe since 87, 88, maybe earlier. I don't know just exactly when, but it was in the 80s.
Okay.
And so Charlie brought me in, and of course you talked about singing. Well, we always sing at Rotary, so then that became, Charlie was usually the song leader, but if Charlie wasn't, I was. And so eventually I became the first female president of the Lowell Rotary Club. That was in 95, 96.
Wow. So between 1990 and 95, 96, you were able to show everybody that you're here to stay, and you're here to carry this badge of honor that you've embraced Lowell and you love Lowell.
I do.
That I'm just so proud of you that of what you've accomplished.
Yeah.
In 5 years, Rotary. Because as a kid, you always hear, well, the older guys, the elders are at Rotary clubs, probably smoking cigars and laughing about who shot the biggest buck or who went out bear hunting or what have you. I never knew what Rotary Club was about. Could you give me an insight of what?
We have an amazing Rotary Club that is very active. Rotary's motto is service above self. And so we do several different service projects. We have both local service projects and international projects. And like you may have noticed, the new deck at the library that's along the Riverwalk, that was a Lowell Rotary project. We've just done several local projects, helping renovate parks and different projects locally. Right now, our biggest project locally is helping with the showboat. And we've raised over $100,000 to help with the showboat.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And then internationally, our projects go, mostly we have worked on water filtration project in Haiti on Laganab Island. And so we've had several mission trips there to help install water filters so that they have clean water. And we just continue to do, we have clubs within elementary through high school. The high school students last year went and built a house in the Dominican Republic, and they're going back this year, and they hope to maybe even do 3 homes in the Dominican this year. So we're teaching service above self from elementary all the way up. And it's just a great organization to belong to.
Now, you said that with elementary school, what are they doing? How are they starting to get their feet wet in elementary school going into high school?
They have clubs within the elementary schools. We call it Early Act.
Okay, I was wondering what that name was.
Yeah, it's Early Act. And they just have different projects. Rotary has been instrumental in ridding the world of polio. And, Bill Gates gets a lot of play on that because he has a lot of money that he can donate.
Thank goodness.
But he is working with Rotary.
Okay.
And so October 24th was World Polio Day, when we celebrate that we now only have 3 countries, almost down to 2, that still have wild polio in the country. And that's, for those of us who have relatives who have polio, I have a cousin who had polio, and you know that it can be a devastating disease. And so Rotary has worked very hard to rid the world. You may hear about Purple Pinky, and Purple Pinky is a way, well, when they give children the vaccine, they paint their fingernail purple, their pinky fingernail purple, so that they know that they've given them the vaccine, because the vaccine's very sweet, and so the kids would get in line to get another dose.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so they had to have a way of knowing that the kids had had the vaccine. And so we'll have days when we make donations to the polio fund and get our fingernail painted purple to designate that we donated.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's great.
it's like I say, Rotary is a great organization, and Lowell has a very active Rotary Club.
It sounds like you guys are very strong, and you're still involved with it, even
Yes.
though that you've. Okay.
Yes, I worked out of town for the last several years of my career before I retired at the end of 2009, and so I wasn't able to do. But once I retired, I came back to the Rotary Club and
To volunteer.
yeah, to volunteer in the club.
So my next question would be, so did you retire from being a postmaster in Lowell?
No,
Okay.
I was the postmaster in Lowell from October of 90 until August of 2000.
Okay.
And in August of 2000, I actually became the postmaster's manager. I got a promotion. And so I became what they called the manager of post office operations. So for every post office whose zip code started with 493 or 494, I was their manager. So when I retired at the end of 2009, I was managing 92 offices.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. That is, and meanwhile, though, you, when did your husband pass?
My husband passed in 1998. I was still the postmaster.
That's what I was.
Yeah, I was still
okay.
the postmaster here in Lowell. And that was a pretty devastating time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I can't say enough for how much the Lowell community loved me and how much they loved my husband, and they showed that.
We still do. We still do. Like I said, when I saw you at Fallisburg, and you're volunteering for Rotary, I thought to myself, well, where's she been? So that's my next group of questions.
Okay.
Is once you left Lowell and you're still working for the post office, so what were you doing? How should I put it this way? So you left Lowell because you became manager of postmaster. A postmaster manager, is that
Yeah,
what that's called?
it was called manager of
Okay.
post office operations.
And you were doing that for 2 or 3 years.
Well, I actually, that was actually my official title from 2000, August of 2000, until I retired the end of 2009.
Oh my goodness.
But in that period of time, I also went and did some work for the area. So I was out of town probably 3 of the last 5 years that I worked.
Now, so did you physically move out of Lowell and get a new house and?
So, as Arnold Wittenbach asked me at Rotary, probably about the 3rd time in, why didn't you buy a house in Lowell? Well, we bought a house in Ada.
Okay.
And so I physically lived in Ada for 26 years. But when I started working out of Lowell, I still continued to worship here in Lowell. My church is here with the Methodist Church. And so even when I retired, my commitment was that Lowell was still going to be my community.
Okay.
And so I retired at the end of 2009, and in about October of 2010. of the leaders at Flat River Outreach Ministries asked if I would come volunteer and work on a special project. And so I'm still volunteering at Flat River since I worked on that project until June of 2011. The executive director position was open at Flat River, so they asked if I would fill in while they found someone for that job. So I was the executive director and on the board of directors through that position. And then in September, they filled that position. And so then they asked if I'd still stay on the board since I was already used to going to the board meeting. And I was back, working on the project in the food pantry. And then in April of 2012, Jody and Craig Haybarker, who had managed the food pantry for like 18 or 20 years, had started it basically. They asked to step down, and so they asked me if I would be the coordinator for the food pantry. So I've been doing that since April of 2012.
Thank you so much for doing that. That was a big project. I was there to deliver some canned goods, and I just looked at the sea of work that you guys were doing and your volunteers, and I was just in awe, and I was stunned at you guys have got it down to a science. I give you kudos for that. Oh my. Now, you're singing.
Okay.
Okay. So did you sing as a child, and how did this start? Because your voice is very tuned well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I grew up one of 8.
Oh my goodness.
8 kids in a farm family, and my dad was a singer. And he'd be out on the tractor singing, and he'd sing at church, and he'd sing at funerals and weddings, and you name it. And so I would go out on the tractor with my dad, and he'd teach me songs. And of course the songs he was teaching me were from the 30s and the 40s and 50s, etc. And so the first time I sang a solo, I was 5 years old at church for the Christmas program, and I've been singing ever since. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So did you get training like later in life? You thought, I'm making great money, I'm gonna go to a singing teacher, I'm gonna go to a voice teacher, and then have you gone to get any of that?
I've done very little of going and paying someone to give me voice lessons, because in every musical track that you take, you sing in choir at church, you're basically getting voice lessons. Okay. They're teaching you how to pronounce words and how to breathe, etc. I did some minor work with the community opera in Kansas City, and was in Hansel and Gretel as the witch for performance. And then when I came to Lowell, a new friend said, "Oh, you should come try out at Ionia Community Theater. They were doing Oliver." So I went and tried out, and I got the lead female part as Nancy. Those things are very, very time consuming, and it's fun to do, but yes. I don't think people realize what a time commitment that is. I've sung for years at church solo, and done different benefit concerts and helped out where I could. And for a period of time, there was a restaurant in Grand Rapids that on Tuesday nights they had live jazz. Ooh. And it was usually female vocalists, and the restaurant owner called it Diva Tuesday. Ooh. So I was one of the divas for Diva Tuesdays. I did that for a couple of years, and that was a lot of fun. Later, since 2012, I was helping take care of my mother, so I'd go to Clare every week for half of the week to stay with my mother. So that kind of wound down some of the extracurricular things.
How big is the farm? Are we talking like 20 acres or
420.
420 acres? Oh my goodness! And what's the family last name?
Brooks.
Brooks. The Brooks
Yeah,
farm.
the Brooks farm
Oh my
on
gosh.
Old 27,
On Old 27.
south of Clare.
Oh my gosh.
Row of maples. There's a row of maples across the
Is
front
there?
of the farm. Yep, two big old farmhouses. And,
Oh my goodness. I'll tell you, I'm in awe, and I'm so glad that, you know, when you grow up in a small town and you stay there all your life, sometimes it's not a good thing for you. Sometimes it is, you know, it doesn't all turn out bad, but I know that, you know, now I understand what makes up Sylvia who she is, because you moved around the country, you did different types of jobs within the post office, and
Yes.
you understood this, or you know, organizing and putting those cogs together. I'm going to tell you personally, you're the best thing that's happened to Lowell. I'll tell you, and I love Charlie Doyle. My mom is dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, and she loved how Charlie Doyle supported her too. My mom did some endeavors. And when you had gotten the job, I'll tell you, the whole town of Lowell, it was a change that we all needed. And meeting you, meeting your beautiful husband,
Yeah.
what a great man.
It was.
I'll tell you, we didn't have nothing better but to embrace him and embrace you
Thank you.
because of who you are.
Thank you.
So I'll tell you, Lowell, we thank you for being a part of us, and we're never going to let you go. We're never going to let you go anywhere, because we want you here. We would love for you to sell your house and why don't you just move next door here? And we'll just keep you safe and sound.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us? Any takeaways?
No, I just, like I say, Lowell, I came to Lowell and it felt kind of like I'd come home, because I grew up around Clare, and Clare's about the same size town. And yet Lowell adds so much more, like its own light and power, its own water. I mean, all of those kinds of things. And then when Mr. Englehart passed and we had the community fund to be able to do the improvements and have things, I just think Lowell's the next best place to be.
It certainly is. Okay. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Tina.
And thank you for listening in to one of Lowell Museum's oral history projects. Thank you.